Hey, everybody, welcome to the Craft Podcast, where Michael and I interview people who are passionate enough to master something. And today, our guest is passionate enough to master many things. We love talking to experts of various fields and learning how they strive towards mastery. And this will be no exception. So, Michael, who's with us today?
All right. Our guest today has been our guest today is Kevin Xu. He's a technology strategist, investor, and founder of Interconnected, a popular newsletter that examines the intersection of tech, business, geopolitics, and US-Asia relations. Kevin's expertise spans various sectors, including open source technology, AI, and blockchain. And he has served in roles in GitHub, PingCAP, and the Obama White House. His insights into the U.S.-China tech dynamics are sought after by major media outlets. So we're thrilled to have Kevin on the show. And Kevin, welcome to the Craft Podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Great. Well, so Kevin, you have a huge range of interests, and you pursue them with excellence. Uh, on this podcast, we always start with people's kind of origin stories. Were there any indications that like little Kevin would grow up to get into politics or end up, writing?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you asked that question. I don't think little Kevin would foresee what Kevin is doing today. In fact, I think Kevin of 10 years ago probably would not foresee what Kevin is doing today. So as far as a quick biographical background, I was born in China, moved to Canada, and then later to the United States for high school. And I think being an only child of the one-child policy generation, and then having my parents kind of split up pretty early when I was, before I was even a teenager. I think I was left to my own devices a lot of times. I was raised primarily by a single mother when I was in Canada. She had to work and build her own career and obviously keep the family together and raise me. But really, for a lot of you who have studied, in the U.S. or Canadian elementary or middle school system, you get out of school really damn early. Your school ends at like 3:30. But if you grew up in China, that is preposterous, right? So I just had a lot of time to watch baseball, to learn English, watching TV. And the internet was like sort of a thing back then, so I could go online and learn a lot of stuff. And I think just that sort of space that I grew up in, where my parents didn't really tell me a lot of things that I should be doing, but they never also prevented me from doing anything I wanted to do, just gave me probably this personality where exploring and being curious and just trying new thing is kind of just my default mode.
Well, a lot of people like with that kind of free time and without maybe parents pushing them wouldn't end up having like really strong drives to go and create and like getting an internship, like getting a role at the White House is not like it's very competitive. Um like where did that come from in you? Is it just genetic or
I think there's probably some level of my personality that is very driven to be curious, but also compete to win. I think a common thread that's always been in my brain, doesn't matter when I was working in politics or later in tech and now doing, financing, investing, is kind of like, can I reach that next level? What is that next thing? And, when I first entered politics right out of college, I was just a lowly little campaign staffer on the first Obama campaign. At that point, I could have never foreseen working in the White House. But after we won and we all moved to DC to look for jobs, one thing led to another that all was just kind of like this little dangling carrot in front of me. But it was also a challenge that made me compete, that kind of asked me, could you actually end up working in administration? Okay, after you work in administration, can you actually work in the White House? After you work in the White House, while the White House is actually a big place, can you actually get a seat in the West Wing of the White House? And there's just like, there's always another level to the experience of everything. And I think that has always driven me more than, you know, money or compensation, because I just always was curious, like, can I actually get there? You know, can I actually reach that level? And if you couldn't, you either give up or you keep trying. And, you know, there are different ways to think about that. But once you get there, there's always another level that you can go. And I think that's just makes life very interesting to live.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, everything has levels. It's interesting to you think of it that way. It kind of like gamifies every experience, right? There's a million different games like that one could play. What are the games that you see yourself playing? I guess in life, or maybe for now, and like why those games instead of other games?
Yeah, I do subscribe to the overall kind of analogy that life is this really big game, where there are just so many different levels, different bosses, you know, boss after boss. There's really like no end to the game of life, right? You can, you know, analogize it to a single industry or a single career. And, you know, for me, I've probably spanned a few different industries at this point. So they're different bosses in different industries. And if you merge multiple industries together, you get like different kinds of like hybrid bosses, right? And we can kind of talk about specifically what that really looks like in life. I know it sounds kind of abstract or even a little silly to analogize it that way, but I do think this gamification of life is not to trivialize life, but I think it makes life very worth living, because there's always something else that you can kind of go after, not because you want to, you know, necessarily beat somebody else up. You just want to see what else is there. What is the next level? What does it feel like to get to that level? And I think that is, you know, what the journey is all about.
Right. So then the ones that you ended up choosing for politics, tech, right? Like how did you come to those?
Yeah, so for the initial stage of my kind of political career, right, that was me wanting to get into the game of presidential elections. I watched this TV show called The West Wing. I don't know if any of your audience have heard of it. It's sort of like the first American TV show about politics that really became big and popular. I watched a ton of that during college, got weirdly inspired by a TV show. I just wanted to figure out how to work in politics, but it sounded very, you know, energizing as a young person. And then, of course, Obama was trying to become president at that time, and he was this perfect vessel to channel a lot of my idealism and my energy to something that's like very productive. And if we were to come back to the gaming analogy, after, you know, a lot of failures along the way, right? You don't get to the next level the first try. In fact, most of the times you don't. You try a few times to get to the next level. I got, you know, I spent a lot of time just trying to get on the campaign, which is actually a pretty hard thing to do. To get a real job in the campaign, you can be a volunteer, but to actually get paid to do campaigning was actually really hard. And then after we won, the next level became, well, can you actually work in this new government that the new president is about to form, right? So you end up figuring out a whole new set of rules about how to get jobs in a newly forming administration, which again, for me, someone who's never had any political background or connection or anything, was a whole new set of rules and a whole new game that I had to figure out. And once I got into that game, the first stop being the Department of Commerce, which already at that point, I was actually pretty satisfied with how well I played the game. Another level showed up, which is that, hey, there might be some opportunities at the White House. So I started giving it tries. I probably failed 5, 6, 7 interviews leading up to the point where I actually got my job at the White House. So that was like another level of the game that I had to figure out that was a little bit different from the game before. So without kind of like beating this gaming analogy to death, there were just a lot of going on in my career. And I do think when I got to the White House, I did feel like I've got to a good level of the political game where I could keep going or I could try something else. I could leverage what I learned from that game to apply to a different game, which ended up being moving to Silicon Valley, going to law school at Stanford, and then jumping into the tech industry full on and figure out a new set of games, which, took really me up until, earlier this summer.
Why did you decide to switch?
I like switching. I get bored when a certain game became comfortable. I like to tell people I get really uncomfortable when I'm comfortable. I was pretty comfortable in the political realm because I figured out kind of mostly how the rules worked, which to most people would mean you exploit the rules, right? You want to go higher, you want to move up faster, you want to make more money. But for some reason, for me, it does, okay, this game was really fun. What are some other games that people are playing? And of course, this was like mid 2010 when tech was really hot in the US, all over the place, certainly, in Silicon Valley. So I wanted to see how that ends up working out for me.
Yeah. So it sounds like in a lot of these endeavors, it's like you get curious about a certain area, you learn the rules of it, and once you feel like you kind of have a good grasp of the rules, at least from your perspective, that's when you start to feel like, oh, maybe I could try something else.
That's right. And, it's never a clean separation. It's never like you gave up the thing that you were doing before completely and start totally fresh, which I think on the surface would deter a lot of people. But there's so many interconnected dots between different industries. You just have to know how to apply it. I'll give you a very specific example. When I first started in politics, my job was a field organizer on President Obama's first campaign. And what that really entails is me running around in a city, recruiting volunteers, hosting neighborhood activities, hosting phone banks and canvases, and organize a lot of people to basically get the president's message out there or the candidate at the time and to get people to vote for him, right? That's a very simple game on the surface, but it requires a lot of organizing energy. I've done, cold calls. Actually, like one of our responsibilities is to cold call 200 people every single night to recruit more people into the campaign, right? And cold calling is frankly a skill that you could use in any situation once you acquire. That's just an ability to be able to communicate to strangers, right? You can use that in sales, you can use that in presentations, in pitches, in fundraising, in everything. But at the time, I didn't know that, right? Now, fast forward to my first foray into tech, which ended up being an open source database company. This was PingCAP. And I didn't really know what open source was at the time or what PingCAP or databases were at the time. But what I got to understand quickly was that to do anything well in open source, you have to build a community, right? And when I was looking at other people in that industry building communities, which the mechanisms were hosting meetups, hosting tech talks, going to conferences. Oh, this looks exactly the same as me hosting town halls, hosting neighborhood canvases, getting people to, basically show up to things, to get interested in something, right?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of methodology, right? So that became actually very natural for me to get into open source and community building and developer relations and all these sort of things that, again, people in politics would have never heard of those jobs, right? People in tech would have never heard of a field organizer, but they're really all the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, and you used the word interconnected when describing this, which I think is fitting given that's the name of your newsletter and blog. And yeah, it's really interesting. So when you think about making switches or like new games to play, I guess you think about how what bridges you have from what you're currently doing or your existing skill sets to something new. So how did you think about that, like from the White House deciding what you were going to do next? Like what were the bridges that you saw to what you did next?
Honestly, at that moment, to be very honest, I was just looking for a switch. I've done a lot of work in politics at that time, and frankly, the easiest way to get out of politics was to go to law school. Oh, that's just like what I ended up
Yeah.
being able to pull off. And I've always had this kind of inner confidence, maybe that whatever I end up switching to next, I could use whatever I was doing before. Like I wasn't too afraid of that change. I mean, this was before I listened to the famous Steve Jobs commencement speech that you can only connect the dots backward. But when I heard that speech, I was like, that's exactly what life is all about. Even though I couldn't ever articulated it in such an elegant way, in the way that he could, that was it. It's like there's no reason to think too much about the dots that you could connect looking forward. It's probably more useful to kind of pause every year or every 2 years or even every 6 months if you want to be really quick about it, to see what dots have I connected in the last little period, right? And then how has that built me? And what are some of the dots that I haven't connected that I need to connect? And what do I need to do to make those dots connect a little bit going forward?
Yeah. And so I guess in the case of law school, like that seems like an easy one. But you also picked up a second degree when you were at Stanford and you started getting into tech.
That's right. And, like it was a really weird law school experience. For those of you listeners who are not familiar with the American law school system, is 3 years, three very expensive years. And initially, I actually did come in wanting to be a lawyer. In fact, my initial motivation was to be a campaign finance lawyer, again, leveraging my, political background, and also, campaign finance in the US was like kind of messed up. It still is kind of messed up. So I wanted to really get into that from a lawyer angle. But then being at Stanford, you kind of just get a lot of tech stuff through osmosis. Like you really cannot escape it, right? Stanford Law School has like a legal tech community, right? And they will bring in these like legal tech entrepreneurs who are using technology to change how the legal industry works all the time, to do talks. And it's just so easily accessible to start to bridge out the moment that you have an opportunity to. So I did that. And then, my second year of law school, I ended up taking all the kind of the basic Stanford computer science, like grad level, like core classes in the CS department, from theory to systems engineering to like probability and all this sort of fun stuff, more because I kind of had a chip on my shoulder, because I was like, if I get into technology, I can't just be like the lawyer who can be conversant in tech, quote unquote. I want to know how the code works. I want to be able to say I can actually code. I do know what an assembly code looks like, and all these sort of things. Which turned out to be a very painful year, to be honest, from like a experiential perspective. Most of my law school friends were partying or hanging out, and I would be on the other side of campus doing problem sets and like scratching my ass out and in office hours, right? But looking back, it was very rewarding, because for me, it just built a lot of confidence when I started actually working in technology later on.
That is cool. Yeah, and also like because I also read a couple of the articles that you wrote on Interconnected. And also I'm pretty curious that how do you come up with Interconnected, and like what was going on leading to founding this newsletter and start writing.
So I've always really liked writing, and I've always had enough kind of positive feedback from the outside to kind of give me enough confidence to say I'm actually a pretty good writer. Even when I was very little, even when I was learning English as a second language. So I've always enjoyed writing. In fact, my law school like personal essay was about writing. It was literally writing about writing, which was probably not like the best idea for a law school essay, but I ended up pulling it off. And all that just led me to be kind of this person that always enjoyed writing. And I always thought like at some point I'm gonna write a newsletter or a blog. And I've, written about stuff before. And I think this was around like near the end of 2019 when a lot of, I think, these big tech blogs like Stratechery and a few others have somehow come onto my attention. And one, I didn't know this was something you could just like do as a job. And two, I really enjoy reading a lot of them. But being the person I am, I always also thought that, hey, I can probably do better than these guys, or at least I can bring a different perspective to the conversation, right? Because there's a lot of things that I learned from. There are a lot of things I don't agree with, especially on the technology business mixture with geopolitics. I felt like I've actually touched all these different fields personally, not just as an outside observer or an analyst or a blogger. So I think I should have something to contribute as well. And coming back to what I could offer to this conversation, looking at all the dots that I've connected backwards, it's like, oh, I have connected a lot of these dots that does not seem to connect on the surface, whether it's working in politics or technology or enterprise technology specifically or open source, and you kind of layer on the international relations geopolitics angle to it. So I came up with the name. The domain name was available, and you just kind of like off you go.
That's very cool. And also, like, I think, is it possible that it's kind of because the interconnected, as the name says, it's really it covers a lot of different angles from tech to business to all politics and also international politics. So is that it's kind of like the distills of your experiences. And I see all these articles are being written in a pretty good way, and it's worth reading. So like what's the process of you coming up all that? And also you also wrote a lot about the China taxing tech and the US and also some business relationship between them. So how do you also do research on that to write all those articles?
Yeah, I think on the first point, when I first was convincing myself to start this newsletter, I was actually very afraid that I will run out of things to write. Right. So I actually came up with, 10 topics first before I even wrote the first one. So, okay, at least I have 10 topics that I think are interesting in the can if I run out of thoughts, for example. And for one reason or another, I don't even remember what the last 5 of those topics are anymore, because once you start going, once your mind starts spinning in that direction, at least for me, you just can't stop. You start noticing things when you read about things, which I just do regularly anyways, right? Like I always have been a pretty voracious reader of all kinds of different topics. And as long as you keep that going, you don't run out of topics to write about, at least in my personal experience, even though I was afraid I could have, because there are just so many dots that you want to connect. And this is not necessarily because other people are not connecting. I never really write to respond to other people as kind of like a debate or anything. It's just that there are all these like things of, oh, it will be cool to kind of write about something where this thing actually is connected to that because I see a connection there, and I'll just kind of describe or explain what I saw. And hopefully, whoever found this post found it interesting. And then one thing just led to another. So you just kind of keep rolling, right? So that's as far as like what a process is concerned, is actually quite organic if you enjoy the painful process of writing on a weekly, or like twice a week basis, which I just happen to. And on the China tech side of things, I got really lucky that PingCAP is a startup that started in China. right? They're doing quite well, I think, still, and they're in this very interesting part of the technology sector that is distributed computing, the cloud native database, and also open source. And that just got me into becoming friends with a lot of real entrepreneurs in that field as well. I think it's always good to really kind of stay connected to people who are doing the work, right? Who are doing the founding, the building, and also the investing as well, right? Like through that experience, I got to connect to a lot of different VCs. And on top of that, reading all the articles that you usually would know about, whether it's on the China tech side, right, like 36KR or Huxiu or all these sort of like typical outlets. And because I can read Chinese fluently, it's easy for me to access that information, right? And then if you talk to people on the ground, that even though you're not visiting there all the time because of COVID and whatnot, you could still be as connected you could be, certainly compared to even reporters in the US who are supposed to cover China or supposed to cover China's technology scene as their job. I and people like me ended up being better connected in that world, right? So you just bring another angle to the conversation. It's not like I'm ever going to do their job, right? The reporter's job, but that gives me kind of just like fresh angles that I think are also real, right? Because a lot of stuff that you read or are commented on are not real, or they're only half real.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good way for coming up on all those. And also, like you mentioned, I think in the Interconnect you have like a 2.0 announcement, and I read that, and you started you mentioned about your new thoughts and also your new chapters. Can you also maybe like talk about cover a little bit on that?
Sure. I'm evolving the newsletter to a new version called Interconnected 2.0. Now that I have left my full-time job at GitHub, I used to be employed at GitHub, to one, make the newsletter even better with more content, with better content now that I can devote to this full time. And there's also a paid version of the newsletter now where people can get additional analysis from me. And also I am working on building an investment partnership, kind of like an old school hedge fund that invest in companies that I think will be the most important technology drivers in this digital AI global economy is what I'm calling it, right? Where everything is going to be very much interconnected, despite geopolitical tension otherwise, which certainly is separating a lot of things, and that's a reality we have to recognize. But I do think technology and technology products, especially on the infrastructure side, on the cloud computing side, on the semiconductor side, and eventually on the application side as well, will continue to just flourish throughout the globe. And I think the recent AI hype is certainly going to be a big driver of that. It is hypey, but I do think there are a lot of real evolution and improvement that's going to come out of it. And even before the AI hype, the digital economy has been very interconnected already throughout the world, whether we recognize it or can feel it or not. So I think there's a huge opportunity there, especially investing in the public market. So I'm doing public market investing, not VC or private market investing, because I think there's a lack of expertise, a lack of operator knowledge, which is what I bring to the table, and also like a real technologist lens to looking at some of these companies in the public market. So hopefully it will work out.
Nice. Hope this is gonna be really another one, like another really nice journey that you're gonna have.
That's right. Another new game, right? To step in.
Yeah.
What are the, like, how do you know when you win, or like when you understand the rules well enough in this game?
I don't know when is in the investing game, to be honest. And I think that's why I chose this game, right? Like you can argue that my previous few experiences I really stumbled into, like I had some idea, but I didn't really know what all these things were. I just kind of like got into it and then started figuring it out as I go. I do think investing is one of those games where you never win. You just keep playing. And
Sounds like gambling.
yeah, like it's what they, people like to call the infinite game, right? And I think that's what's very exciting about it to me, because there's always going to be new companies that are going to be forming. There's always going to be new technology that's going to get created. There will always be new world events, new Fed policies, new, international relation developments, whether it's to the good or to the bad. That's going to impact a lot of what's going to happen to our lives, which is intimately touched by technology. So there's just like a never-ending source of things to learn. So that in that dimension is infinite. And then I think as far as like investing, the actual numbers game, the money side of it, that's also infinite, right? Like there's actually no real numerical ceiling to how far you can go. It's just a number, and it's not a number that really means anything to your daily life after a while. Once you get to a certain level of wealth, I'm certainly not there yet. But theoretically, that if you work hard, hopefully you can get there. And after that, there's still more that you could do. And there's so many examples of famous investors who have achieved results or the game like way beyond anyone could ever imagine from a money perspective, yet they're still playing, right? Like Warren Buffett is still playing, Charlie Munger is still playing, Stanley Druckenmiller is still playing. I believe George Soros is still playing. His family office is quite active. And it's not like they need the money, right? But they just enjoy being in the game in their own unique way. And I just find that very alluring. So hopefully I can play for a very long time as well. I'm just starting to play. And the goal is to just like not get kicked out of the game. And
Nice.
Are there so are there any games that you tried to play, you found that you were bad at and decided to exit? And like what was that experience like? Because like a lot of times on this podcast, we just like talking about failures because you learn a ton from them. And yeah, I'm curious, like anything that you can share from that. And I guess, yeah, like what you learned from it that you can apply now to Interconnected.
I think I was pretty bad at the early kind of tech startup game, to be honest. So when I was first graduating from law school, one of the other reasons I was learning computer science with law was to actually start my own company, right? My initial idea was to start a chatbot that could talk to your health insurance contract, so you can get useful information as a user of health insurance. So you can like figure out what your insurance policy actually does, and all
So
these.
this was pre-chat GPT.
This was pre-chat GPT. This was pre-large language model. Right. This was back in 2016, 17 was when I was tinkering on making this bot. And at the time, as I discovered building my prototypes and trying to, get users and all that sort of stuff, it's actually an exceedingly difficult computer science challenge to read a big PDF. I thought you could, like OCR the thing, get a bunch of text, and then you start tokenizing all the words, and you can make some sense of it, and then you can just have a chat interface to talk to it, right? And then like off you go. And of course that did not work. And I also chose a field where I think the barrier to experimentation was much higher, right? You're talking
Healthcare.
about people's health, you're talking about their health insurance. You don't want to make a mistake, or rather the chatbot should not make a mistake, otherwise the liability is much higher, right? And that's actually a problem that even chatbots today are still trying to deal with as they get enterprise adoption. But we didn't have LLMs to just kind of like, oh, here's an open API, open AI API that you can call, and then you're kind of like done with that thing. But I think during that time, I also realized that I'm not as good as I would like to be as a startup founder, certainly compared to my other peers when it comes to telling the story, building the team, and kind of doing everything in a very focused way. You have to be, in my opinion, quite a hedgehog personality to really dive into a specific problem that really starts out fairly small to really nail it. And then maybe you grow it over time and it becomes a big company, hopefully, right? Now that I'm on the investing side, I certainly I do some like an early stage investing, as an angel, and then obviously I do public investing now. But the kind of personality that I like to look for on my early stage investing is the opposite of who I am. Because I was so bad at being super focused on this problem. I'm sure if I were a more focused personality, I could have maybe took it a little bit farther, but I wasn't. My mind started wandering. I started thinking about this, started taking like online Coursera courses about something completely related, as opposed to really diving into the this healthcare chatbot problem that I selected for myself. So there was a lot of kind of painful learning from that initial experience. Obviously, I also had like student loan I had to pay off from my law school, so financially I was like under a lot of pressure to make things work. And there are all these other kind of external ingredients that makes me just like a pretty bad, I think, startup founder for the most part.
Well, there's two ways to approach that. Like one is, I just need to get better, or like learn these skills. How do you know when it's a line where it's like, oh, this is just my personality is this way, versus it was like this is something where I can learn, or I can build the right habits to get to where I need to be.
I think that's the internal nature versus nurture question. I don't have a good answer to that. All I can say is I think earlier in my career, I was more on the nurture side of the spectrum, where I think anything that I can, if I can just come up with some way to learn it or to like force it into me, right? I could do it. Doesn't matter how unnatural or how kind of like instinctually unfit I am to do that thing, whatever that thing might be, right? And I think as I gotten older, I started to become more on the nature side of things, where I think or spend more time assessing myself to figure out what I'm naturally more good at, what I'm naturally really bad at. As long as the thing I'm bad at is not destructive, I'm gonna just kind of let it be relatively bad.
Yeah.
And then spend more time really kind of driving my strength and amplify it and make it even stronger and make that more part of who I am, and also bring in the direction that I want to choose in a way that kind of fits into my strength. And hopefully, as I build Interconnect 2.0, we will be expanding our team. We'll be hiring people at some point, that I can bring in people who are naturally good at the things that I'm really bad at. And then we can complement each other. I'm much more of the complementarian side of things. I know this is an ongoing debate. People have different opinions about what you should do, but I just don't have like superhero kind of sort of complex, I guess. Like I'm very okay being very bad at a bunch of different things, and not let that actually get to me as I am a bad person or I'm an incapable person. I think I have done enough to know that I'm capable, generally speaking, but specifically, there are definitely a bunch of things that I'm incapable of.
Yeah. And it sounds like, at least for Interconnected, like it hits on a lot of the things where you not only feel capable, but it's stuff that I don't know if it gives you energy. I mean, writing is always hard. But it sounds like it just aligns very well with um, things that you're good at and things that you enjoy.
That's right. I think, writing is probably one of those common thread or even a common craft that I have been honing throughout my life, even though I might have applied them to different industries, right? Like when I was in the White House, I was in the communications department. When I was in the commerce department, I was in the communications department, which is all about writing, right? Even writing press releases, speeches, and stuff like that. Tech, I did a lot of writing, dealing with reporters, dealing with analysts, right? Which is kind of another way of thinking about strategic communication. And now that I'm writing for myself, I do find writing to be this common thread for me, where even though it is painful, and I don't think I will ever stop feeling the pain of writing, there is a little bit of catharsis every time you finish something, even though you don't like it. You just sort of put it out there and let it be, knowing that in a few days you get to do it again. You get to hopefully do it a little bit better, or do it a little bit more clever, or have a stronger argument, or a more elegant way to craft a story or to make a point. And that just is an endless kind of stream of shots on goal, if you will, to use a hockey analogy, that you get to have as long as you're willing to take the shot. And that is something that I feel like I should just keep on amplifying, as opposed to other formats of communication too, right? Like I've tried podcasting before in another realm. I've always thought like, oh, should I do a podcast for Interconnected, right? Should I even do just like an audio version for the post that I write? And that will obviously add more work to the workload, but it could amplify and get more audience. And I never did it because I just don't think it amplifies my strength, if you will. Maybe that will change at some point in the future. But I just kind of like stuck to the craft of writing, and then to just keep on making that better and better and better, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, pretty soon with 11 Labs, you probably don't need to do anything, and you can turn your content into a great piece of audio for podcasting.
There you go. Hopefully. Like I think, like speaking is more laborious to me than writing for whatever reason. And I've gotten to realize that over the years. So if there's some wonderful AI that can mimic my voice and just like read my post, that would be great.
We're actually experimenting with that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Like for this, but yeah, going both ways, like from audio, like long form audio, get a transcript, cut it down into like a summary or a blog post, and you can publish that. But there's also the other way, going from, which is like it's very similar now that a lot of AI is multimodal. It's just like you change your plugins and go to a different direction, but you can go from like a long blog post and then turn it into either like a summary audio, or even make it sound like a conversation. I think I've seen some, I forget where, experimentation of people doing that, because if you hear it, maybe in written form, the best version is like a long form, like the types of stuff that you write for Interconnected. But in audio, if you just make it sound like a conversation, then it's like more engaging. That type of stuff is all coming down the pipe.
That's right. No, it's super exciting, honestly. I know there's a lot of concern and worry about what's AI going to do to us, et cetera, et cetera. But as a creator, and you guys being podcasters are by definition creators. I feel like very soon we're going to have very mature products that are just going to be superpowers 5 years ago that we could not even imagine. And I don't think that takes away from the originality of the conversation, right? Or the thoughtfulness of the question that you still have to ask as podcasters. AI can take over that, or the research you have to do to come up with those questions, or for me, the actual threads of analysis that I have to make. But all these sort of like marginal format things are pretty repetitive, right? And if AI can do that better than we can, then more power to all of us.
Yeah. And I want to ask about that analytical process that is the hard part. So we talked a little bit about like how you do brainstorming, and you start connecting dots on kind of regularly. And then we talked about like the the output, like it's painful, but you get, satisfaction from having published something. What does that middle period look like? Like, do you have a big note stock? Like, what does it look like when you start out with a blank page? How do you get yourself to fill it up? Um, yeah, like the sausage, the actual sausage making.
Yeah, it definitely looks very boring if you were to actually observe me, like be a fly on the wall of my house and see how I do it, which is like a lot of pacing, a lot of sitting, a lot of reading, right? I think walking around and really sort of sitting with the stuff that you read or the thoughts that got triggered when you were reading about something, or even when you're not reading about something, you just have thought about this for a very long time. Like quite a few of my, post ideas were things that I thought of last month, but I didn't
Right.
really have a coherent thought around it. I just know I wanted to think about it. So I just kind of kept on thinking about it. And there are other posts where it's much more reactionary. Like you read something, you thought about something immediately, and then the next day or two, you bang it out because you kind of know exactly what you wanted to say. So
Right.
they kind of come in two different forms. For like the more longer term simmering ones, it could take me like 2 to 3 weeks to really even decide that I should write about it. Right. A lot of things I just have thoughts and I just like don't even bother. They're just stupid thoughts and they leave the other way. Right. But it just ends up being me kind of staring into the roof of my house a lot of times, or like go walk
Mm,
outside and like stare into the sky, because I think I actually find it hard to think when I'm staring at the screen, whether it's my
right.
laptop or reading on my phone. And that's when you maybe absorb information, but you don't actually have any thoughts in my experience. When you absorb information, you're just getting like, you're just like kind of like handling what's coming at you. You're not putting
Yeah.
them together. And
Training versus inference.
exactly. I'm training, I'm not inferring, I'm not outputting anything, right? Until I have enough training to adjust all my parameters and my biases. And I actually kind of learned, I became a better writer when I started learning computer science, oddly enough, when I was, writing programs and doing problem sets. And one of the things that one of the practice that I picked up in class was to write pseudocode first before you really like start banging on the screen, right? Which
Right.
is in a way outlining, right? Like you're outlining the logic of how you're going to solve this problem or to make a program work. You don't really care about the syntaxes and all that kind of shit just yet. You want to just know, is your logic actually going to flow? Will this probably work before you start putting
Right.
code? And now when I write is a very similar process. I have a few points I want to lay out. Are they connecting with each other? Is this going to make a coherent argument before I start putting them into English or Chinese or whatever language I get to write in the future? By the time I start writing, kind of 80% of the work is already done. I just need to put
Right.
them down into sentences that are, hopefully digestible, not too hard, and gets the point across.
Yeah. Is it all in your head, or do you have a notebook, like a big note stock?
I don't.
That's amazing.
Wow.
I mean, it's not like I try to do it that way, or I've heard of a lot of people with you carrying a notebook, you like jot stuff down, right? Like I was, oh wow, that's the way I'm going to do it. And I did carry a notebook for a little while and I just never did it. Again, not part of me, I guess, and you can't really fight that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, it most of the time it just kind of lives in my head, and sometimes I do forget things, so I do need to like jot it down really quickly if I do come up with something that's like really good. I think at the moment, so I don't forget it. So that does happen from time to time, but most
Mhm.
of the time it's not something where I like jot down a lot of notes.
Wow. So you must have an incredible memory.
I don't think I have a good memory for facts anymore,
Hmm.
but I think I'm developing a better memory for connection, if that
Mm.
makes any sense. I
Hmm.
used to be able to memorize a lot of stuff, right? Just kind of like a kid growing up, like you learn math or you learn history or whatnot, you just memorize these factoids, right? And I think as the internet became what it is, that becomes a pretty useless skill. Um,
Yeah.
But like, what do you do with the facts? I think will become more valuable. And I just start like shifting towards, I don't really need to remember any facts anymore. As long as I know the facts are there. I mean, you can't make up the facts. You have to know the facts are there, just not the specific details. But it's like the relationship between facts that are more worth remembering.
Yeah.
That's nice. And like maybe let's wrap it up before. So one more question before we wrap it up. So basically, you have like really rich experiences for your career, and also like given your wide array of interests, how do you stay focused like when you pursuing mastery, especially trying to stay consistent with what you're doing,
I
at
think
least for the current game that you're playing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's hard, right? It's a very real struggle, especially for people who are naturally curious. And curious is a nice way to call it. You can also just say I'm naturally unfocused, which is also very fair as well. I think having a public newsletter where there's a forcing mechanism really helps. You kind of have to deliver something on a regular basis, right? Whether people read it or not, or care about it or not, is kind of a very good way to self-discipline yourself. So at some point, your mind stops wandering and you have to focus. And I think investing to me is the same way, which is that at some point you need to generate return. You need to have a performance. These are things that just you have to have, right? And there's just a number at the end of every month or every quarter or every year that is your scorecard for the year. And you cannot run from that and pretend to do something else and still feel like you're doing something productive, because you're not. Right. So I think that is a good forcing mechanism for me to be like focused on, learning more technology, learning more about the companies that you're interested in, learning more about the relevant information that impact your investing thesis, which for me is very technology driven, right? It's very sector driven. It has, geopolitical angle to it as well. But also there are a lot of like noise that you could probably peel away. And hopefully having that, circle of competency really helps you eliminate things that you have to do, not just create things that you think that you have to do. I think that's also very useful. So those two things for me really complement each other as far as giving myself a way to focus. It does not mean I focus all the time. There are definitely days where I just end up wandering in all kinds of silly ways, but they do bring you back eventually.
Cool. So summarizing that, the first is having like a more like a reward kind of mechanism to keep you going ahead. And then the second one is basically trying to stay away from noise and have the ability to detect noise and pruning them. That's nice. So what's the maybe like one or two key takeaways or highlights for our listeners that you have? And also like how should our audiences and folks to follow you and stay what you're up to?
Yeah, so as far as the newsletter, you can go to interconnected.blog. We also have a Substack version of that newsletter as well that you can find to subscribe and read. We have 3 years and 10 months worth of archival content at this point. So there's plenty to dig around. And for me, I'm pretty active on social media. You can find me on Twitter at KevinSXU. And on Twitter or X or whatever, and on LinkedIn as well. And as far as the takeaway is concerned, I think you guys call this the craft podcast. So the people who listen to this hopefully want to either they have a craft that they're honing or they want to figure out what is their craft. I think everybody has this pretty common desire to figure out what they are meant to do on this planet, right? Like not to be super metaphysical about it. And that could be reduced to a craft. For some people, it's making sushi, right? I think a lot of people have watched the Jiro Sushi documentary, right? Where the craft is literally making rice for 10 plus years before you even get to cut the fish. That's one form of craft. And then you have other forms of craft that is feels more interdisciplinary. I am that kind of craftsman, if you will. And I think that's also okay. I think the term craft, the way people use it, have this single disciplinary bias to it. Like you have to go deep into one thing, which is fine if that's what you would like to do. But I do think there is another iteration of craftsmanship, which is you connect different things together to elevate them into something that other people who are outside of those disciplines don't see. And I think that's also equally valuable.
Wow. Thank you very much for your highlights and takeaway. That's really nice. And I hope,
Got it.
yeah.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So our guest today has been Kevin Xu. Kevin, thanks so much for being on The Craft.
Awesome. Great talking to you guys. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to The Craft Podcast. If you like our interviews, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. That's the best way to tell the platforms, YouTube, or wherever else you're listening or watching, that this is great content. For more links or episodes about this episode, for more links or information about this episode, or to listen to more, you can search for The Craft Podcast by Dan Tedesco and Michael Du on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time, and until then, keep crafting.